Imagine sacrificing 2 weekends of your life, 16 hours of overtime in freezing warehouse conditions, missing your child's soccer games, all to afford a single gift. Then imagine watching that gift destroyed in seconds by someone else's children while their parent laughs in your face and refuses to take any responsibility. This is the true story of a parent who reached their breaking point, made a decision that divided their entire family, and learned that sometimes standing up for yourself costs more than money ever could. This is a story about sacrifice, boundaries, and the moment when being the nice one finally comes to an end. Our story begins in the suburbs of Chicago, in a modest 3-bedroom house where Sarah Mitchell lives with her 12-year-old daughter, Emma. Sarah is a single parent, a reality that came after a difficult divorce 3 years prior. She works at a logistics warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a job that demands physical strength and mental endurance. The pay is decent, but as any single parent knows, decent doesn't stretch as far as it used to. Every dollar is calculated, every expense is planned, every month is a careful balancing act between necessities and the occasional small joy. For 6 months, Emma had been asking for something specific, not just any smartwatch, but the premium model, the one with advanced fitness tracking, built-in GPS for safety, educational apps, and the sleek design that all her friends at school seemed to have. The price tag was steep, $349. For Sarah, that amount represented more than just money. It represented groceries for 2 weeks, or the electric bill, or the cushion she tried to maintain for emergencies. But Emma wasn't demanding or entitled about it. She showed Sarah the features, explained how the GPS would help Sarah feel safer about her walking home from school, how the fitness tracking could help with her soccer training. Emma even offered to help with extra chores, to earn it somehow. Sarah made a decision. The warehouse offered overtime on weekends, something she typically avoided because those were her only days with Emma. But for 2 consecutive weekends, Sarah said yes. She worked Saturday and Sunday, 8-hour shifts each day, in a warehouse where the heating barely functioned during the brutal Chicago winter. Her hands went numb handling packages. Her back ached from lifting boxes. She missed Emma's soccer game on the first Saturday, a game where Emma scored her first goal of the season. She missed their traditional Sunday morning pancake breakfast, twice. Every moment of those weekends, Sarah thought about Emma's face when she would finally present the watch. The sacrifice was worth it when Sarah finally had enough. She ordered the watch online, waited anxiously for delivery, and on a Wednesday evening after school, she presented it to Emma. The reaction was everything Sarah had hoped for. Emma's eyes went wide. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the box, and when she put the watch on her wrist, she threw her arms around Sarah with a force that nearly knocked them both over. For the next 3 days, Emma wore that watch everywhere. She tracked her steps walking to school. She called Sarah from the playground just because she could. She showed it to her friends with pride, not in a boastful way, but in that innocent way children have when they receive something that makes them feel seen and valued. Those 3 days were perfect. Sarah would glance at her own sore muscles, her tired eyes in the mirror, and feel that it was all worth it. She had given her daughter something that made her happy, something that made her feel safe and connected. What Sarah didn't know was that those 3 perfect days were all she would get. Sunday afternoon arrived with unexpected visitors. Sarah's brother Marcus showed up at her door, unannounced as usual, with his 3 children in tow. Marcus was 2 years younger than Sarah, but you wouldn't know it from his attitude. He worked in real estate and business had been good. He drove a new SUV, wore expensive watches himself, and never missed an opportunity to mention his latest sale or investment property. His wife, Jennifer, had stayed home that day, something that had become increasingly common. Sarah suspected Jennifer was tired of managing their three energetic boys alone, while Marcus checked his phone constantly for work. The boys, Tyler, who was 10, Jason, who was 9, and little Kevin, who was 7, burst into Sarah's house like a tornado. Marcus barely acknowledged Sarah's greeting before heading to her kitchen, helping himself to coffee, and launching into a story about a property he'd just closed on. This was typical Marcus behavior. He treated Sarah's home like an extension of his own, never asking permission, never checking if it was a good time to visit. Within minutes, the boys were running through the house. Tyler jumped on Sarah's couch. Jason pulled books off the shelf in the living room, flipping through them carelessly before tossing them aside. Kevin found Emma's art supplies and started opening markers, testing them on his hands. Sarah felt tension rising in her chest, but she bit her tongue. This was family. You accommodate family. That's what their mother had always taught them. Emma, who had been in her room doing homework, heard her cousins arrive. Despite the chaos they typically brought, Emma was a sweet-natured child who tried to see the good in everyone. She came downstairs, excited to show her cousins her new watch. She found them in the living room, where Marcus was still talking at Sarah, oblivious to the destruction his children were causing. Emma approached little Kevin first, showing him the watch. His eyes lit up with interest. She showed him the fitness tracker, the different watch faces you could choose, the way you could make calls. Then Kevin asked if he could try it on. Emma hesitated. She'd only had the watch for 3 days, but Kevin was her little cousin, and he looked so excited. She glanced at Sarah, who was distracted by Marcus's monologue. Emma made a decision she would regret. She took off the watch and carefully placed it on Kevin's small wrist. What happened next occurred in less than 2 minutes, but Sarah would replay it in slow motion for weeks afterward. Kevin wore the watch for approximately 30 seconds before Tyler noticed. Tyler, always competitive with his brothers, demanded a turn. Kevin refused. Tyler grabbed for it. Kevin pulled away. Jason joined in, seeing an opportunity for chaos. The 3 boys began playing keep-away, tossing the watch between them. Sarah's voice cut through the noise, sharp and alarmed. "Stop. Give it back to Emma, now." But the boys were caught up in their game, laughing, shouting. Marcus glanced up from his phone but didn't intervene. "Kids will be kids," he said with a shrug, as if that explained everything. Sarah moved toward the boys, but she wasn't fast enough. Tyler threw the watch high in the air toward Jason. Jason, distracted by Sarah approaching, missed the catch. The watch arced through the air and fell, in what seemed like slow motion, onto the tile floor of Sarah's kitchen. The sound it made was sickening, a crack, sharp and final. The watch hit screen first. Sarah reached it before any of the boys did. She picked it up with shaking hands. The screen was shattered, a spiderweb of cracks radiating from a central impact point. She pressed the side button. Nothing. The screen stayed black. $349, 16 hours of overtime. 2 missed weekends with her daughter, all destroyed in seconds. Emma's face crumpled. She didn't scream or throw a tantrum. She just stood there, tears streaming silently down her face, staring at the broken watch in her mother's hands. The boys had gone quiet, sensing they'd crossed some invisible line. Marcus finally looked up from his phone, taking in the scene. He saw the broken watch, saw Emma crying, saw Sarah's face, and he did something that would change their family forever. He laughed. Not a nervous laugh, but an actual chuckle. "Come on," he said, "it's just a watch. These things happen." Before we continue, we want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone damaged something precious to you, something you worked hard for, and they just dismissed it? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments. We want to hear your story. And if you're invested in finding out what Sarah does next, stay with us, because what happens is going to shock you. Sarah stood in her kitchen, holding the broken smartwatch, looking at her brother, and something inside her snapped. Not in a violent way, but in the way a rope snaps when it's been pulled too tight for too long. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but carried a weight that made everyone in the room freeze. "Marcus," she said, "your children just broke a $349 watch. You need to pay for a replacement." Marcus's expression shifted from amused to annoyed. He set down his coffee cup and crossed his arms. "You're joking, right?" He looked at her like she'd suggested something absurd. "Come on, Sarah. It was an accident. Kids break things. That's life." Sarah's hands were shaking now, but not from fear. From rage that had been building for years, rage she'd always swallowed down because she was the nice sibling, the accommodating one, the one who kept the peace. "An accident," she repeated slowly, "would be if Emma dropped it herself. This was your children playing keep away with someone else's property after I told them to stop, and you sat there and did nothing." Marcus scoffed. "I'm not paying $300 for a watch. That's ridiculous. Besides, if it was that important, maybe Emma shouldn't have let Kevin try it on. He was already shifting blame, already rewriting the narrative in real time. That's when Sarah told him the truth. She told him about the 2 weekends, about the overtime in the freezing warehouse, about missing Emma's soccer game, including the first goal she'd scored all season, about the sore muscles and the exhaustion and the sacrifice. Her voice cracked as she spoke, but she kept going. That watch represented more than money. It represented time she could never get back with her daughter. It represented sacrifice and love, and trying to give her child something special in a life that had already taken so much from both of them. Marcus's response was dismissive, almost cruel. "That's your choice to work overtime, Sarah. That's your choice to, quote, spoil your kid with expensive stuff. My kids don't need $300 watches. They're perfectly happy with what they have." He gestured at his boys, who were now huddled together on the couch, quiet for once. "And honestly, maybe this is a good lesson for Emma about material things not being that important." The room went silent. Even the boys seemed shocked by their father's words. Sarah looked at her brother, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. She saw the entitlement, the lack of empathy, the way he'd always operated under different rules because he was the favored child, the successful one, the one who could do no wrong in their mother's eyes. Sarah's next words were measured and final. "Get out." Marcus blinked, surprised. "What?" "Get out of my house," Sarah repeated. "Take your children and leave. And don't come back until you're ready to pay for what they broke and teach them basic respect and responsibility." Marcus laughed again, but this time it was forced, uncomfortable. "You're seriously going to kick out your own brother over a watch?" "That's insane, Sarah. Mom is going to hear about this." Sarah walked to her front door and opened it. "Yes," she said quietly. "Mom probably will hear about it. I'm sure you'll tell her your version, but right now, I need you to leave." Marcus grabbed his keys, called his boys, and stormed toward the door. As he passed Sarah, he muttered, "You've changed. You used to be cool." Sarah's response was immediate and calm. "No, Marcus, I finally stopped letting you treat me like a doormat. There's a difference." The door closed. The house was quiet except for Emma's soft crying from the living room. Sarah stood there, her heart pounding, her mind racing, knowing that what she'd just done would have consequences far beyond this moment. But for the first time in years, she'd stood up for herself and her daughter. And despite the fear of what was coming, she didn't regret it. Before we get to what happened next, we want to take a moment to thank you for staying with us through this intense story. We know it's not easy to watch families fall apart, but the truth is, these situations happen every single day. Your support means everything to us, and trust us when we say the best and most shocking part of this story is still ahead. Stay with us. Marcus didn't waste time. Before he'd even driven out of Sarah's neighborhood, he was on the phone with their mother. Sarah knew this because within 20 minutes of Marcus leaving, her phone rang. Mom. She considered not answering, but that would only delay the inevitable. She picked up. Her mother's voice was sharp, disappointed in that particular way that made Sarah feel like a child again. Sarah Ann Mitchell, what is going on? I just got off the phone with your brother, and he's very upset. You kicked him out? Over a watch? Sarah took a breath. She explained what happened. The watch, the sacrifice, the destruction, Marcus's refusal to take responsibility, but even as she spoke, she could hear her mother's mind was already made up. Her mother had always favored Marcus. He was the son, the successful one, the one with the big house and the perfect family image. Sarah was the divorced single mother, the one who worked in a warehouse, the one who'd, quote, failed at marriage. Her mother's response was predictable but still painful. You're being materialistic, Sarah. It's just an object. Family is more important than things. Marcus said you were really aggressive with him, that you attacked him in front of his children. I didn't raise you to be like this. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Mom, his kids destroyed something I worked 16 hours of overtime to afford. I asked him to replace it. He refused and laughed at me. How is that me being aggressive? But her mother wasn't interested in Sarah's perspective. You need to apologize to your brother. This is family, Sarah. We don't sue each other. We don't hold grudges over money. You need to be the bigger person here. Sue? Sarah hadn't mentioned anything about suing. That meant Marcus was already anticipating her next move, already playing victim to their mother. The conversation ended badly, with her mother insisting Sarah was tearing the family apart over materialism, and Sarah realizing that no matter what she said, she would be cast as the villain in this story. The next few days were brutal. Marcus posted on social media a carefully worded message about how sad it was when family members valued objects over relationships, about how he was praying for certain people to find peace and perspective. He didn't name Sarah, but he didn't have to. Family members who followed both of them knew exactly who he meant. The comments poured in. People who didn't know the full story offered Marcus support, told him he was better off without toxic people in his life, praised him for being the bigger person. Sarah's phone blew up with messages. Her Aunt Carol sent a long text about forgiveness. Her cousin Rachel called, asking what really happened, saying the family was divided. Her Uncle Tom sent a brief message. Whatever Marcus did, you should let it go. He's family. Even people who weren't there, who didn't witness what happened, felt entitled to opinions. The worst part wasn't the extended family. It was Emma. Her daughter had become withdrawn, quiet. She blamed herself for letting Kevin try on the watch. She overheard some of the phone calls, knew the family was fighting. One evening, she came to Sarah with tears in her eyes. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I showed them the watch. I'm sorry I broke our family. Sarah held her daughter, fighting back her own tears. You didn't break anything, sweetheart. You were being kind and sharing. What happened wasn't your fault. But even as she said the words, Sarah wondered if she'd made the wrong choice. Maybe she should have just let it go. Maybe $349 wasn't worth all this pain. But then she thought about what message that would send to Emma. That her time wasn't valuable, that her property didn't matter, that people could damage what belonged to her and there would be no consequences, that keeping peace was more important than standing up for yourself. Sarah realized this had stopped being about the watch the moment Marcus laughed and refused to take responsibility. This was about teaching her daughter that she had worth, that her boundaries mattered, that sacrifice and hard work meant something. 2 weeks after the incident, Marcus still hadn't paid. He'd blocked Sarah's number. Their mother called twice more, both times insisting Sarah apologize and move on. And that's when Sarah made a decision that would shock everyone in her family. She filed a claim in small claims court. She had receipts for the watch purchase. She had security camera footage from her home that she'd installed years ago for safety. Footage that showed the boys playing keep away, Sarah telling them to stop, Marcus sitting on his phone doing nothing, and the watch breaking. She had Emma's tearful testimony. She had documentation of her attempts to resolve it privately. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. When Marcus received the court summons, he called their mother immediately. Sarah learned about his reaction through her cousin Rachel, who was one of the few family members still talking to both of them. Marcus had apparently exploded, calling Sarah insane, vindictive, greedy. He told everyone who would listen that he was being dragged to court over a children's accident, that Sarah was willing to destroy their family over money, that he couldn't believe his own sister would do this to him. The family divided clearly into camps. Team Marcus, which included their mother, 2 of their 3 aunts, several cousins, and most of Marcus's friend circle. Team Sarah, which was smaller. Cousin Rachel, Sarah's best friend from work, and surprisingly, their elderly Uncle George, who'd been quiet through most of the drama, but sent Sarah a text that said simply, "Good for you. He needed to be held accountable years ago." The 6 weeks before court were lonely for Sarah. She'd never been estranged from her mother before. Emma asked several times if Grandma was still mad at them. Sarah tried to shield her daughter from the worst of it, but kids are perceptive. Emma knew the family had fractured, and Sarah could see the weight of it in her daughter's eyes. The small claims court was in a grey building downtown, the kind of place that smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee. Sarah arrived 30 minutes early, her stomach in knots. She dressed professionally, slacks and a blouse she normally saved for parent-teacher conferences. She brought a folder with all her documentation, receipts, printed photos of the broken watch, a USB drive with the security camera footage, her work timesheet showing the overtime hours. She felt simultaneously over-prepared and completely out of her depth. Marcus arrived exactly on time, flanked by Jennifer, who looked uncomfortable and tired. He wore a suit, probably the same one he wore to show expensive properties. When he saw Sarah, his face hardened. They didn't speak. They sat on opposite sides of the waiting area, 2 siblings who'd once shared a childhood bedroom, now treating each other like strangers. The hearing itself was surprisingly quick. The judge, a woman in her 60s with grey hair and sharp eyes, reviewed the paperwork both sides had submitted. She asked Sarah to explain the situation. Sarah kept her voice steady, professional, factual. She explained the watch, the overtime, the incident, Marcus's refusal to pay or take responsibility. She avoided emotional language, stuck to the timeline of events. The judge then asked to see the security footage. The bailiff set up a laptop, and the courtroom watched the scene unfold. There was no audio, but the visual told the story clearly. The boys tossing the watch. Sarah standing up, her body language clearly indicating she was telling them to stop. Marcus on his phone, the watch falling. Emma's body language, the clear distress. Marcus shrugging. Then it was Marcus's turn. His argument was that it was an accident, that Sarah was being vindictive and materialistic, that Emma had given Kevin permission to wear the watch, so she bore some responsibility, and that family disputes shouldn't be handled in court. He painted himself as the victim of an unreasonable sibling who cared more about money than family relationships. The judge listened patiently. Then she asked Marcus a simple question. "Sir, did your children break the watch?" Marcus hesitated, then admitted yes, but it was an accident. The judge continued, "And did you offer to replace it or compensate your sister in any way?" Marcus's answer was defensive. "No, because it was an accident, and family doesn't nickel and dime each other over accidents." The judge leaned back in her chair. She'd clearly seen hundreds of cases like this, family disputes over money, property, responsibility. Her ruling was clear and unambiguous. This wasn't about family dynamics. This was about property damage and accountability. The security footage showed clear negligence. Children playing recklessly with someone else's property while their parent failed to supervise or intervene. The judge ruled in Sarah's favor. Marcus was ordered to pay $349 for the watch, plus $217 in court costs and filing fees, for a total of $566. Payment was due within 30 days. Marcus's face went red. He looked like he wanted to argue, but Jennifer put a hand on his arm. They left quickly, Marcus muttering under his breath. Sarah sat in the courtroom for a moment after they'd gone, feeling strange. She'd won. The judge had validated her position, confirmed that she wasn't crazy or materialistic or vindictive. She had legal proof that she'd been in the right. So why did she feel so hollow? The money arrived 28 days later, a check in the mail with no note, no apology, just the exact amount required. Sarah deposited it and ordered a replacement watch for Emma. When it arrived, Emma opened the box quietly. She thanked Sarah, put the watch on, but Sarah noticed she took it off when she got home from school and put it in her drawer. The joy was gone. The watch had become a symbol of family destruction rather than maternal love and sacrifice. The aftermath was exactly as painful as Sarah had feared. Her mother still refused to speak to her. Marcus blocked her on all social media. Family holidays became complicated negotiations. Thanksgiving was split. Marcus and his family at their mother's house. Sarah and Emma had a quiet dinner alone. Christmas was the same. Birthdays went unacknowledged. The extended family remained divided. Some relatives quietly reached out to Sarah, admitting privately that Marcus had always been entitled, that their mother had always enabled him. But they couldn't say so publicly because they didn't want to be cut off too. Emma, resilient as children can be, eventually adjusted to the new normal. She stopped asking when they'd see Grandma again. She stopped mentioning her cousins. But Sarah saw the loss in her daughter's eyes and knew that Emma had learned a painful lesson about family, that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the first ones to abandon you when you stand up for yourself. 6 months after the court case, Sarah ran into Jennifer at a grocery store. It was awkward, but Jennifer approached her. They talked briefly. Jennifer looked exhausted. She admitted quietly that Marcus hadn't really changed, that he'd been angry for months, that the boys had been getting worse because Marcus refused to discipline them, that she was tired of making excuses. She didn't apologize directly, but Sarah sensed Jennifer wanted to. They parted cordially, but Sarah knew Jennifer would go home to Marcus and wouldn't mention this encounter. A year later, Sarah received an unexpected message. Uncle George, the one who'd supported her decision, had apparently spoken to their mother. He'd told her bluntly that she'd been wrong, that she'd enabled Marcus his whole life, that Sarah had been the responsible one and deserved support. Their mother sent Sarah a brief, stilted email. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement that perhaps things had been more complicated than she'd initially understood. Sarah wrote back politely, but didn't push for more. Some bridges, once burned, can't be fully rebuilt. They became cordial strangers, people who shared genetics and history, but not closeness. Marcus never apologized. From what Sarah heard through the family grapevine, he still told the story as if he were the victim, as if his unreasonable sister had sued him over nothing. But Sarah noticed something interesting. Other family members started holding Marcus accountable in small ways. When he showed up late to events, people called him out. When his kids misbehaved, people stopped making excuses. Sarah's stand, painful as it was, had apparently given others permission to stop enabling him too. Emma, now 13, recently asked her mother if she'd regretted taking Uncle Marcus to court. Sarah thought carefully before answering. She told her daughter the truth. Regret was complicated. She regretted the pain, the family division, the loss of relationships. But she didn't regret standing up for both of them. She didn't regret teaching Emma that her work had value, that her property mattered, that people who hurt you should be held accountable. and that sometimes doing the right thing costs more than you want to pay. Emma nodded, processing this. Then she said something that made Sarah's eyes water. "Mum, I'm glad you stood up for us, because now I know you'll always have my back, even when it's hard, and that's worth more than any watch." Sarah kept the court ruling in a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that boundaries matter, that being the nice one, the accommodating one, the peacekeeper, isn't always the right choice, that teaching your children to have self-respect sometimes means losing people you thought would always be there, and that sometimes justice comes with a price tag that has nothing to do with money. The watch, the replacement one, still sits in Emma's drawer. She wears it occasionally now, but it's not special anymore. It's just a watch. The real value was never in the object. It was in the lesson both Sarah and Emma learned, that your worth isn't determined by who stays in your life, but by your willingness to stand up for yourself, even when everyone tells you to sit down. So was Sarah right to take Marcus to court? Should she have let it go for the sake of family peace? Or did she do exactly what any parent should do? Teach their child that accountability matters, that hard work has value, and that no one has the right to destroy what you've sacrificed for? These are the questions that divided not just Sarah's family, but every person who hears this story. We want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Did you regret your choice, or would you do it again? Share your story in the comments below. We read every single one, and your perspective matters. Your experience might help someone else who's facing a similar situation right now. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel something, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We share real stories about real people facing impossible choices, and your subscription helps us continue bringing these important conversations to light. And don't go anywhere yet. Your next recommended video tells the story of a woman who was excluded from her own mother's will because she refused to loan her brother money, and what happened next will leave you speechless. Thank you for watching, for thinking critically, and for being part of this community where real stories matter.